Well, if there's one thing most people like complaining about, apart from that, it's the cost of living. Probably with good reason. Food, fuel and rail fares are putting the squeeze on everyone's money. But in reality, can the government do anything very much about rising prices? We sent David to foodie heaven to find out.
Can I have one of your peaches, please? Here you go. Nice one. Cheers, thanks. Politicians will always tell you they're on your side, they're listening, and they're fighting to keep the cost of living down. And we always believe them, don't we? Do you think the government's doing enough to keep the cost of things like fuel, food and rail fares down?
Well, no, definitely not. It's done nothing but go up.
Absolutely not. Inflation, the world recession, I think there's a lot more could be done by the government.
I think people just have to be more careful with how they spend their money and not obviously spend lots on cake and tea.
Like banoffee pie?
Like banoffee pie, for example.
But is it actually fair to blame politicians for things like the cost of food, petrol, or even your daily commute into work?
Well, politicians are pretty powerless, actually, when it comes to global prices, food inflation, the price of oil going up or down. I mean, they are sometimes blamed when it rains, blamed when the sun shines, and blamed for football defeats. But I rarely feel sorry for politicians, but on this occasion, when the economy here is influenced by things abroad or supply and demand, there are only limits to what they can do.
So what have they done? Well, personal tax allowances have been increased. A planned rise in fuel duty has been postponed until January next year, and the Office of Fair Trading is to probe the price of petrol. The government's also promised to look at English rail fares, however, they're already set to rise by double the rate of inflation next year. But are things actually as bad as they feel?
Food, fuel and rail prices still continue to increase, but the thing to take into account is they're increasing at a lesser rate than they were around about a year ago. But the public's perception of that may be quite different. And in actual fact, they perceive far higher increases in inflation than is actually mirrored in the numbers.
And here's some radical food for thought. Ministers should forget about public opinion and actually do less, not more, about the cost of living.
The trouble is, politicians are judged by us all on what they do, and they feel they've got to do something all the time. It would be great if Prime Ministers asked them sometimes, what have you done today? Nothing? Take a pay rise. Just make sure that you set broad parameters and then let business get on.
There are some recent examples of governments trying to mitigate the effect of the markets, in particular in Asian economies where they've introduced fuel and food subsidies when these commodity prices have been particularly elevated. And what we do find is that very quickly those public coffers are drained in this support of lower prices for their consumers.
Politicians like to let on they've got all the answers, but it seems the cost of living is largely out with their control, which is a pity, because it's the one thing we all really care about.
David Thompson there. Well, we're joined now by the Conservative MP Nadeem Zahawi. Well, let's take up that point. Can politicians actually do anything about the rising cost of living?
Well, you can do some things. So, for example, making sure that the interest rate at which the government borrows at remains to be competitive and low.
But we've done that. Well, it's been there for years, and food and fuel is still rising.
I don't disagree with you. When commodity prices are going up, these things do make a difference. But on fuel, I think it's important that we continue the pressure. There's a backbench debate this month on what the oil companies are doing in terms of fuel. We've had whistleblowers saying that this could be a price-fixing issue.
Hold on a
second.
I always find this frustrating when politicians talk about fuel and talk about the oil companies. £1.40 a litre, roughly, 80p of that is tax. The majority is tax. Listen, if you wanted to win a general election quite easily, one of the main things you would do, and I'm not saying it's right to do this, is drop petrol prices down to £1. When I was meeting the Consumer Minister recently, I asked people, if you were in that meeting, what's the one thing you would say? And the first 200 responses on my Facebook page were, cut the price of petrol.
Right, so let me take you up on that.
You could cut it down to £1 if you wanted.
Let me take you up on that. For one, we've dropped it by 10p. Which is a difference.
To what it would have been.
Average,
not dropped it compared to what it would have been.
So you've just taken the rise out.
We've taken the rise out. No, and 1p lowered. So there's been a 1p.
That's not dramatic.
Right? No, hold on a second. I'm not saying that is dramatic. Right? We can do lots of stuff that we can start spending more now. Right? Forgetting about... Denmark has just done it. In fact, they voted in a government that effectively did what Labour are calling for, which is let's just borrow more and spend more. What happens in the end is they're still in recession. The next generation has to pay the price for what we spend today. So at the end of the day, you can do lots of popular things very quickly to become more popular, but you will pay for them at some point. Someone has to pay at some point.
That's a much more honest answer. The much more honest answer is to say we do have the ability to drop petrol down to £1 a litre, but the rest of the taxpayers would then have to subsidise the car driver. And it's the fact that politicians, this is what annoys me, don't use that type of language. We can cut gas and electricity prices too. The question is who's going to pay for it. The biggest problem on gas and electricity is the average typical price now is £1,310 before price rises that we're in the middle of. The cheapest is £1,040. It's a charge for apathy. Those people who are financially illiterate, who aren't on the internet, who don't understand, who are scared, pay more than savvy people and wealthy people like me who know what we're doing. And you could effect change on that by regulating the market more strongly, but you choose not to. So I don't like to hear this, we're doing what we can. You're making a choice, a political choice of what we do, and I think the electorate needs honesty.
And do you think they should be more clear about that?
Well,
politicians and leaders of the party should say, we're not doing this because we don't want to, it will cost us more later.
Well, no, I think you can't get more honesty than people saying, look, that what we've inherited is a situation where there is no more money. Liam Byrne told us, good luck to you, there is no money. So you've got to try and balance the books somehow. When you're borrowing £450 million a day, you've got to raise taxes from somewhere. What we've tried to do is listen. So when motorists said, look, £1.45 for a litre is just too much, we tried to do something about it. We've deferred some of the fuel duty rises. We've lowered it so that now it's 10p less. It's not a huge amount of money. You're absolutely right. I'd love to be able to sit here and say we're going to drop it to £1. But you know what? My children, your children, our children will have to pay if we are irresponsible with money now.
And it's the same with food prices too. As that goes up, you're not going to be able to do anything about that either.
Well, there's no VAT on food. So it's a very different case. Commodity prices go up around the world, and that's what happens. You've got to try and do what you can to bear down on interest rates so that inflation remains. If interest rates go up by 1%, by the way, the money that we borrow at goes up by 1%, you know better than anyone else, because you are financially savvy, what that would do to mortgage payments, to all the other payments.
What do you say to that?
We talk about quantitative easing, this printing of money, which isn't really printing money. But actually, if you look at the PPI reclaiming, has put more money in the economy and done more for people with lack of income in this country directly than quantitative easing. I mean, you could give people money. My biggest frustration, if I was sitting in your chair and an MP, the thing that drives me up the wall is it's not going to be a quick fix, but the real thing we could do to change this would be to have compulsory financial education in schools. If you did that, then people would actually start to have an understanding of the differentials on gas and electricity. You would avoid the bloodbath that is coming, the budgeting bloodbath that is coming when universal credit is introduced, and you change people who've been budgeting per week
from a weekly to a month.
To a month. And I tell you, people are not financially literate enough to deal with that on small amounts of money. Pension auto-enrolment. Why we don't have financial education in schools. We talk about these things, but you refuse to give people the tools to deal with them and help themselves. You can't say people have to look after themselves, but not give them the tools.
But that's exactly what you do,
frustrating.
With huge respect for you, we are doing a lot on education, because we are actually trying to make
not on the universal credit when you move from week to a month.
Fine, but the point was are we doing enough in schools to educate children, to give them the tools?
I've been campaigning on this for 2 years. The answer is clearly no, it's not on the curriculum.
Let's make them be more rigorous in understanding maths and having a deep understanding of that subject before we move on from that. We need the basics right. We had 13 years of education. Nothing happened.
I'm going to stop you both there. I've got to thank both of you very much. We'll have to get you on again and do a replay of this cost of living argument. Whew, temper's running high here. Thank you both very much. Now,